The mantel clock in the receiving hall of Windermere had not missed a tick in 70 years, but Crispin Ashcombe, the 8th Duke of Windermere, had begun to resent the sound of it. 4:20 past 11. His bride would arrive at noon. He stood at the tall window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the long gravel drive as it cut between the yew hedges toward the gatehouse. A weak sun struggled through the October mist. His father had died in September of the previous year, and every autumn now smelled like his father dying. Behind him, his aunt moved quietly across the parquet, the hem of her dove-gray gown making the faintest shush against the floor. Lady Agatha was 72 years old and had not once raised her voice in Crispin's memory, which was perhaps why her silences carried the weight they did. "You need not stand at the window like a condemned man," she said gently. "It does not become you." "Does anything become me today, Aunt?" "Stop sulking, Crispin. You signed the agreement. Your father signed the agreement. The girl has done nothing to deserve your mood." "I do not know the girl. That is entirely the point of this morning." He did not answer. His fingers tightened behind his back. He knew the terms of the thing by memory. His father, weeks before the end, had summoned the family solicitor and instructed that the matter of the Windermere succession be settled before the illness took his faculties. An appropriate alliance had been found. The young woman was the daughter of the late Baron Pembroke, raised in the country under the guardianship of a cousin, of suitable birth and suitable dowry. Crispin had not asked to see a portrait. He had not asked her Christian name. He had signed in the hand of a man agreeing to a sentence. "You might at least wear a civil face," Lady Agatha said. "I shall wear whatever face I am wearing when she walks through the door. That is precisely what concerns me." The clock struck the 3/4. From the drive came the sound of hooves and the low rumble of wheels on gravel. Crispin closed his eyes for the length of one breath. When he opened them, the carriage was drawing up before the portico, a handsome black equipage with a Pembroke crest painted upon the door. A footman had already descended to the step. The household staff, assembled along the hall as was the custom, drew their shoulders back. Lady Agatha touched his elbow. "Come away from the window, my dear. It is unseemly to be caught gawking." He came away from the window. He took his position near the hearth. He laced his hands before him like a man about to receive an indictment. The great doors opened. The butler announced them in the voice he reserved for occasions of consequence: Mr. Tobias Pembroke, guardian of the lady, and Lady Honora Pembroke of Greyhurst, betrothed of his Grace the Duke of Windermere. Mr. Pembroke entered first, a slight man of perhaps 30, fair, anxious, bowing low. Crispin returned the bow without seeing him. Then she stepped forward. She was wearing a traveling gown of dark green wool, simple, the cut a little out of fashion, her bonnet already removed, her hair dressed plainly at the nape. She was not tall. She carried herself the way a person carries themselves when they have decided not to tremble. Her eyes came up to meet his. They were gray. Gray with the slightest ring of green near the pupil. He had seen those eyes before. He had seen those eyes at dusk, 4 summers ago, across a lantern-lit terrace at a country house in Somerset, whose name he could no longer recall. He had seen those eyes watching him through the gap between 2 hedges in the kitchen garden of that same house, while he had coughed blood into a borrowed handkerchief and begged her not to call anyone. He had seen those eyes close when he had kissed her, at the wrong hour, in the wrong place, a person he had known by only the plainest of names and had lost, utterly, before the month was out. Her name had been Nora then. Nora Hayward. It was not Nora Hayward. The room was waiting for him to speak. He had rehearsed the words the evening before. Lady Honora. You are most welcome at Windermere. His tongue lay behind his teeth, like a thing carved of stone. She did not look away. She did not blink. She had been rehearsing too, he realized. She had known whose house she was walking into. She had prepared herself for this moment, and she had prepared very well. He could not speak. He had commanded men in the late war. He had spoken in the Lords before he was 25. He had delivered his father's eulogy in a cathedral without the smallest tremor in his voice, and now he stood in his own receiving hall and could not find 3 civil words to offer a woman who had walked through his door. Lady Agatha, who missed nothing, stepped forward with a grace honed across half a century and took the young woman's hands warmly in her own and began the pleasantries he could not. Crispin heard none of them. He heard only the absence of his own voice and the ticking of the mantel clock and the small, cold thought that came to him with the clarity of a bell struck in a still church. She knew. She had known all along, and she had come for him anyway. Lady Agatha was saying that the journey must have been a tiring one, that the north road from Greyhurst was never kind at this season, that a little warmed wine would be brought directly, that Lady Honora must make herself entirely at home within these walls, which were now to be her own. Her voice was light and unhurried, and perfectly pitched, to occupy the space Crispin had been unable to fill. Crispin bowed. He took the gloved hand that was offered him. He brought his lips within the customary half-inch of the fingers, and did not permit himself to touch them. "Lady Honora," he said. The name came out. "Your Grace." 2 words. No more than that. She had not quite looked at him. "You are most welcome at Windmere." "Thank you, Your Grace." Something inside his chest, which had been clenched since he had seen her face, did not loosen. If anything, it tightened a further notch. She spoke as a stranger speaks to a stranger at the edge of a dance floor. A perfectly civil woman delivering perfectly civil words to a man she had never met before. He understood at once that she intended to play the part she had been contracted to play, and intended to play it without a single false note, and intended to do it in front of his household, as if no other kind of greeting had ever been possible between them. He bowed again. He said nothing more. They proceeded to the drawing-room, where the solicitor from Lincoln's Inn was already waiting with the papers set out upon a long table of black walnut. Mr. Pembroke walked at his cousin's elbow and murmured reassurances in a tone that suggested he had been murmuring them since they left the carriage. Lady Agatha walked beside Crispin and did not say a word, though he could feel her observing him as a physician observes a patient upon whose pulse much depends. The solicitor rose. The contract was read aloud. It was a document of some length, and Crispin heard perhaps one phrase in 4. Portions, settlements, jointure, the reversion of the Pembroke acreage in Worcestershire, the date of the ceremony, which was to be the 15th of December. His name was read. Her name was read. Honora Eveline Pembroke, daughter of the late Barnaby, Baron Pembroke, and of Marjorie Hayward, his wife deceased. The mother's name landed in Crispin's ear like a stone dropped onto stone. Hayward? She had not borrowed the name. It had been her mother's. He was instructed to sign. He signed. He did not trust his hand for more than the 3 letters of his Christian name and the loop that followed, but the loop came out straight enough. He passed the pen. She took it without looking at him. She signed in a small, precise hand. The solicitor sealed the instrument. 2 witnesses signed beneath. The contract was binding. The contract was observed. Luncheon had been laid in the lesser dining room. Only the 4 of them sat. Mr. Pembroke spoke with an energy that betrayed how much he had feared some obstruction at the signing, and how relieved he was that there had been none. Lady Agatha engaged him kindly. She asked after his late uncle the Baron, whom she had met, she said, at the Warwickshire Assembly in the year the old king died. Mr. Pembroke was flattered to have been remembered. He bloomed. He told stories. Crispin ate nothing. Lady Honora ate very little. They sat across from one another, and did not once look across the polished mahogany between them. Her right hand, resting on the edge of the tablecloth, was steady. He noted that her fingers were ungloved now, and that the second finger of her left hand bore no ring. She wore no ornament at all, except a small mourning brooch pinned at her throat. Jet, unpolished, the kind worn in the second year of grief rather than the first. Her father. He had not known her father was dead. He had not known any of it. He had signed a contract that named a young woman he had never met, and had spent the months since in the indolent belief that he would feel nothing at all when the girl appeared. He understood now, watching her lift a small piece of bread and return it to her plate uneaten, that he had been a fool of a particular kind, and that the penalty for the foolishness was about to be assessed against him in full. When the meal was cleared, Lady Agatha rose and proposed that the betrothed pair take a quarter-hour's turn in the long gallery, as custom required, so that they might converse briefly in private before the guests departed. Mr. Pembroke made a small, unhappy sound, which he tried to pass off as a cough. Lady Agatha smiled at him beautifully and took his arm and led him away to inspect a tapestry she wished very particularly for him to admire. Crispin and Lady Honora were left alone together at the threshold of the long gallery. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she turned from him and walked into the gallery unescorted, her back straight, and he followed her with the sensation of a man walking into a room where a candle had been burning unattended. The gallery was the oldest part of the house, dark oak underfoot, portraits of dead Ashcombs looking down from both walls, the north light falling in long pale bars through the mullioned windows. She walked to the center of the gallery. She stopped. She did not turn to face him until he had come to within a pace of her. "You may speak now, Your Grace." He opened his mouth. She waited. "Honora." She flinched. It was the smallest movement. It was enough. "Have we met before?" he said. Her lashes lowered. Her jaw moved once as though she were tasting something she did not wish to swallow. She raised her eyes to his. "Once, Your Grace." "Where?" "You do not remember the name of the place, Your Grace, because you never once thought to ask it of me." She did not wait for him to answer. She walked past him, close enough that her sleeve brushed his, and he smelled the faintest trace of some clean, pale scent he had almost forgotten. Lavender and green stem. And she passed out of the gallery and left him alone among his ancestors, with the closing of the door behind her. The sun had long since sunk behind the western wood when the household gathered for dinner that evening, and it was to be the three of them at table, as Mr. Pembroke would be staying the night before, departing for Greyhurst at first light. Lady Honora was to remain at Windermere. That had been among the stipulations. The bride must take up residence 6 weeks before the ceremony. The bride could not be sent back. The dining room was lit by 2 silver branches of candles, and by nothing else. The effect was one Crispin had always cherished in autumn. A soft gold weather held up against a greater dark. Tonight, the soft gold only served to make her face more legible across the table, and her face was a closed door. Mr. Pembroke talked to fill the silence. He asked after the chase in Crispin's woods, after the brood mares at Windermere, after a mutual acquaintance named Fellows, who owned a neighboring manor. Crispin answered in monosyllables. Lady Agatha had been called away by a letter from her sister, and did not join them, which Crispin suspected was a diplomacy of her own devising. When the covers were drawn and Mr. Pembroke excused himself to write letters, she rose with him and made her curtsy and turned to leave the room. "Lady Honora," she stopped without turning. "A word, if you will permit it. In the library." "It is late, Your Grace." "It is not late. It is 9:30. A pause. Then, in a voice that had lost nothing of its composure, "Very well." She went to the library ahead of him. He found her standing at the farther end of the room with her back to the door, her hand upon the spine of a book she was not reading, her shoulders set in a line which warned him that if he approached too quickly she would turn to the door and be gone through it before he had crossed half the carpet. He closed the door quietly. He did not approach. "I would not have you believe," he began, and then could not find the second half of the sentence. He started again. "I have been trying since noon to construct the speech I ought to have made to you this morning. Have you? I have not succeeded. Then perhaps the speech is not one that can be made." He crossed to her slowly. She did not turn. "Honora, will you not look at me? I find I prefer the books, Your Grace. Do not call me that. That is your name. I was informed of it 3 weeks ago in a letter from my cousin. I was not informed of the name under which you had gone about the country a summer or 2 before. It transpires that Your Grace is a man of several names. I find I must use the one your father put in the contract." He took one more step and stopped, because any further would have been presumption. "I had the fever that night," he said quietly. "At the Litchets. Do you remember?" Silence. "You helped me," he said. "You came upon me in the kitchen garden and you did not call the house. You brought me water from the well in a cup you had stolen from the breakfast tray. And you sat with me for an hour in the dark. You would not tell me your full name. You told me you were a cousin of the Litchet girls, staying for the summer, that your uncle had taken you in after your mother's passing. You gave me the name Nora. You told me to come to the terrace at 9 the next evening. I came to the terrace at 9 the next evening. You were not there." She had begun, very slightly, to shake. "I wrote," he said, "to Hayward at Litchet, care of the house. The letter was returned. I wrote to the Litchets themselves, asking after the niece who had been their summer guest. Mrs. Litchet wrote back in surprise that no such cousin had stayed with them that season. I rode to the house in October. They received me kindly. They had never heard of Honora Hayward. Her hand on the book was white at the knuckles. I searched," he said. "For the better part of a year, I searched. And at length I decided that I had dreamt you. And I tried, with some success, to forget." At this, she did turn. Her eyes were bright, but she had not cried. She wasn't going to cry. "My uncle took me away the following dawn," she said. "I did not know where we were going. He did not tell me for 3 days. My mother had just died. My father was unfit for the care of a daughter. My uncle was the only family I had who would have me, and he removed me from the Litchets without informing them because he did not approve of the company I had been keeping. He burnt the letters that came. I did not know you had written. I learned it, Your Grace, an hour ago, in this room, from you." He could not speak. She made a small, bitter sound that was not quite a laugh. "Do you know," she said, "what I believed for 4 years? I believed you had trifled with a girl who did not signify. I believed you had ridden away at daybreak and forgotten the name you could never be troubled to learn. Honora, stop saying my name as though it belongs to you." A knock, sharp, at the library door. A footman, his face red from riding. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace." A rider had come in from the home farm. Mr. Hollis, the steward, begged a word at once. There had been a matter in the lower pasture that could not wait the hour. Crispin closed his eyes. "I must attend to this," he said. "Yes. I will return within the hour. You will find me gone to bed, Your Grace." He looked at her for a long moment. He bowed. He went. When the door had closed upon him, she stood very still in the center of the library, and her hand came up to cover her mouth, and she permitted herself precisely 3 breaths in which to be shaken. Then she straightened, and she smoothed her skirt, and she lifted her chin, and she made herself ready for whatever came next. She had not told him everything. She had kept one fact for herself, and she would keep it a little longer. She had known his face from the contract miniature, from the very first glance, 3 weeks ago in her cousin's parlor, and she had chosen to come anyway. He returned to the house 4 hours past midnight. The matter in the lower pasture had been a child, not an animal. Young Tom Craswell, the blacksmith's third boy, who had gone out into the storm-swollen drain at the head of the lower field because his father's dog had gone into it first and had not come up. The dog was dead when they pulled it out. The boy had been found alive but blue, wedged between the brick and the iron grate at the head of the culvert, and it had been Crispin himself who had gone into the waste in freezing ditch water at 2 o'clock in the morning, because there were no other hands small enough, and the steward would not let the child's own father make the attempt. The boy was alive. Hollis would see him home. The Duke had ridden back to Windmere alone. He came in through the servants' entrance at the east of the house because he did not wish to be observed. He was caked to the thigh with black mud. His coat had been given up. His shirt, beneath it, had held. He was shivering in a manner he could not at once control. Jepson, his valet, met him at the back stair with a silent face and an armful of towels. His bath, already warming, had been ordered the moment the boy came round. Jepson had done this before. Crispin took the towels. He dismissed the man. He went up alone. He was moving along the upper corridor toward his own chamber, coat over his arm, hair dripping, when he saw that the library door was still standing an inch open, and a thin yellow light was still coming out of it. She had not gone to bed. He stopped in the corridor. He looked down at his hands and saw that the knuckles were bleeding from the brick of the culvert, and he saw at the same time that the hallway clock below showed 4:20 past 4, and he understood that a gentleman in his condition was not in any state to present himself to a woman who had already had 1 day of insult from him. He could not, equally, walk past. He pushed the library door open. She was sitting in the wing chair nearest the fire, which had been fed down to a heap of red embers. She had not changed for the night. She had a shawl over her shoulders. A book lay closed on the arm of the chair. She had not been reading. Her eyes were shut, and her head was tipped slightly back against the wood. She was not asleep. He could see the tension along her jaw. Her eyes opened at the creak of the hinge. She saw him. For a long second, she did not move. Then she came out of the chair all at once, quickly, the shawl falling from one shoulder. "You are hurt," she said. "It is nothing. Go to bed. Your hand. It is nothing, Honora. Please." She was already at the hearth, already lifting the lid of the ewer that stood on the washstand near the window, already tearing a strip from a cloth that had been laid there for the grate. She did not look at him as she worked. She poured a measure of the water into the basin. She steadied the basin upon the low table by the chair. She crossed to him, and she took his hand in hers without asking. He felt the warmth of her fingers through the mud and the cold. He did not permit himself to breathe. "Hold still," she said. "What are you doing? Cleaning your hand? Do not speak, or I shall press harder than is necessary." He held still. She worked in silence. She was efficient. She did not flinch at the blood. She dipped the cloth and wrung it, and took his hand again, and began to wash the mud from between the small bones of his knuckles with the kind of attention a person gives to a task they have performed 100 times. She had done this before, he thought, for someone, and the thought of someone else receiving her cool hands in an hour of hurt was a thing he did not have the strength to examine. The water in the basin darkened. She did not look up. "A child fell in the drain," he said, because he could not bear the silence. "He is alive. And you went in after him. There was no one else who could fit. You are the Duke of Windmere, a fact which hasn't before now required any swimming. The corner of her mouth moved. He could not have sworn to it, but it moved. She bound the cloth around his knuckles. She tied it neatly. She did not step back. Honora, do not. He looked down at her. Her hair had come loose at one side. There was a small smear of mud from his coat on the pale blue of her gown, and she had not yet noticed. Her lashes were wet, and she had not cried. She was perhaps 4 years older than the girl who had sat with him in the kitchen garden of the Litchett house, and she was the same girl entirely. And he had been so near the end of his endurance for 23 hours that he said the next thing before he had decided to say it. "If I had found you that summer," he said quietly, "I would not have let anyone take you from me." Her hand was still in his. She went very still. She did not pull away. She did not lift her eyes. "Do not say such things to me," she said, in a voice that was not quite her own. "Not tonight. I have not the strength for it tonight. Forgive me." She drew her hand back then, slowly, as if she were afraid of breaking something. She stepped away from him. She walked to the door. She stopped on the threshold without turning. "You are bleeding through the cloth," she said. "Do not sleep until Jepson has seen it properly." "Honora." "Good night, Your Grace." The door closed. He stood alone in the library with a dying fire at his back and his bound hand at his side, and the shape of her absence more present in the room than her presence had been a moment before. In the corridor outside her own chamber door, Lady Honora Pembroke pressed her forehead briefly against the cold panel of the wood and closed her eyes. And she reminded herself of a thing she had sworn to herself in the parlor of her cousin's house 3 weeks ago, when the contract had first come for her to read. She had sworn that she would not love him. She had not sworn that she would not tend his hand. But she understood now, standing with her head against the door, that these were nearer to the same oath than she had allowed herself to believe when she had made them. A heavy frost had come in the night, and the lawns beyond the east windows were a glass white sheet when Lady Honora Pembroke came down to breakfast at 9. She had slept perhaps an hour. Her cousin Tobias was already at the table, reading the county paper at arm's length because he had lost his spectacles somewhere on the road and had been too proud to say so. Lady Agatha sat at the foot of the table with a dish of dry toast and an expression of immaculate unreadability. The Duke, Lady Agatha said lightly, had ridden out before dawn to inquire after the tenant's boy and was not expected before 11. Tobias lowered the paper. "My dear, you look unwell. Did you sleep?" "I slept enough." "You did not sleep at all," said Lady Agatha mildly. "Tea, my dear." "Thank you, Aunt. I mean, Lady Agatha. You may call me Aunt if you wish. I'd rather like it." Honora did not answer. She took the tea. She did not drink it. A sound of hooves upon the gravel brought all 3 heads at the table toward the windows at the same instant. Tobias half rose. "I was not expecting any callers. Were you, Lady Agatha?" "I was not." A moment later the butler appeared at the door and announced that Mr. Gideon Marchmont had begged leave to present his compliments to Mr. Pembroke and to the ladies, being passing through the county on his return from the north. Tobias's face cleared. "Marchmont, yes, certainly, show him in." He turned to Lady Agatha. "A neighbor of ours at Greyhurst. Has a estate near Ludlow. A very old friend. I had not expected him at Windermere, but how very kind of him to look in." Lady Agatha inclined her head. "Anyone known to you is of course welcome at this house." Mr. Marchmont was shown in. He was a tall man of perhaps 34, dressed well but not flashily, his riding clothes dusty, his manner easy and warm and impeccably judged. He bowed over Lady Agatha's hand. He greeted Tobias with a clasp and a pleasantry. He turned last to Honora. "Lady Honora, forgive the dust of the road. I had not thought to descend upon your first morning in your new home, but I was within 7 miles of the house and could not, in conscience, have passed without offering my congratulations. Mr. Marchmont. She was surprised, she found, that her voice was steady. She was surprised, also, that her pulse was not. He had written to her 6 times across the past 3 years. She had not answered more than politely. She had believed him to be a harmless fixture of her cousin's world. She looked at him now and saw that he had been watching her, at the door, for a fraction longer than courtesy allowed. Breakfast was drawn out. Mr. Marchmont was invited to sit. He accepted. He took the seat, Honora noticed, which placed him directly in her line of sight. He asked after her journey, with a concern that was not quite credible on the lips of a gentleman who had, until yesterday, no reason to know she had traveled. He inquired after the Duke with just enough warmth to pass inspection. He told Lady Agatha that he had been acquainted with her late brother at Oxford, which Lady Agatha received with a small smile that Honora now recognized as the smile Lady Agatha employed when she had caught a man in a useful half-truth. At the hour of 11, the Duke's step was heard in the entrance hall. He came into the breakfast room in his riding dress. His hair was still damp from the air. The cloth on his right hand had been replaced by a cleaner bandage. Honora's eyes went to the bandage without her permission. She brought them back up. His eyes had already found Mr. Marchmont. Marchmont rose. The 2 men took each other's measure across the cloth. "Your Grace," the visitor said smoothly. "Forgive my intrusion. I was passing on the Ludlow Road." "Marchmont," said the Duke. His voice was perfectly cordial. It was also quite without warmth. He crossed the room. He did not offer his hand. He took the seat beside Honora, which was the seat no one had yet taken, and which placed his left shoulder within half an inch of her right, and which put a foot of polished mahogany between his body and the visitor's gaze. She felt the warmth of him at her side. She did not move. "You know each other," Lady Agatha remarked lightly. "We have met," said the Duke. "At White's," said Marchmont at the same moment. "Some years since." "At White's," the Duke agreed. Nothing more was said for the space of 3 heartbeats. Tobias coughed. Lady Agatha signaled the footman to refill the coffee. The conversation resumed around the edges of the silence that had opened at the center of the table and did not quite close again. Marchmont was invited, by Tobias, to remain to luncheon. Marchmont accepted. The Duke did not object. The Duke did not, Honora observed, speak another word to the visitor for the whole of the meal. He addressed several remarks to her, softly, about small things, the fire in the library, the bound hand. She answered each. Mr. Marchmont heard every word of it. When the covers were drawn, Honora excused herself and went to walk in the south gallery, hoping she might be alone with her own breath for a quarter hour. Mr. Marchmont found her there within 5 minutes. "I did not follow you," he said as he came up. "Lady Agatha suggested I admire the Holbein. Mr. Marchmont. You are very pale, Lady Honora. Forgive the liberty. If I were a stranger to you, I would not presume. I am not a stranger. I am quite well." "You are not," he said softly. "You are not well at all. And I am, I find, unable to withdraw without saying to you what I came here to say." She said nothing. "Marriage by contract to a man one has not met is a barbarous custom," he said. "It was barbarous when it was put to you. It is worse now that you are under his roof. I have, Lady Honora, a certain knowledge of the Duke of Windermere. It would be ungallant of me to describe it to you in detail in such a room as this. I have said too much already, and I must go. I ask only that you permit me to return tomorrow, and that you hear me out in a quieter place. If at the end of what I tell you, you remain content to proceed, I shall congratulate you and trouble you no further." He stepped back before she could answer. He bowed. He left her standing before the Holbein with her hands cold and her mind very quiet. It was a cold quiet. It was the quiet of a house at the moment before the windows begin to rattle. The rose walk at Windermere in October held the last of the season's flowers along an east-facing wall of old red brick. Honora stood beneath the brick for nearly half an hour before she heard the step she had been dreading behind her. She did not turn. "Marchmont is an old suitor of your cousin's household," the Duke said without preamble. "He has proposed to you 3 times. Your cousin has declined on your behalf on 3 occasions. I had it this morning from Tobias himself, who believed I knew it already." "I did not say he was a stranger to me," she replied. "You did not say he was a rejected suitor either." "I was not asked." "Honora, look at me." She did not look at him. He was at her shoulder now. He did not touch her. He had not touched her since she had tied the cloth about his hand. "He did not come to Windermere to congratulate you," the Duke said quietly. "He came to offer you something." "I should like you to tell me what." "I find," she said, "that I do not wish to be interrogated in my own garden. It is my garden. It was to be mine." He was silent. She could feel him choosing not to answer that. "You are jealous, Your Grace," she said at last, and her voice had steadied. "You are jealous of a man who rode 20 miles through the frost to inquire after my happiness. You who did not inquire after my happiness for 4 years. That is not fair. It is precisely as fair as you have been to me." "Honora," she turned then. She had not known she had tears so near the surface. They did not fall. "Do not warn me against him," she said. "I have endured 3 years of your absence on the assumption that you were not worth my grief, and I have endured 3 weeks of your contract on the assumption that you were. I cannot today endure a lecture from you upon the trustworthiness of men. I shall form my own estimate of Mr. Marchmont, as I have formed my own estimate of you." She left him in the rose walk. Marchmont came the following morning, as he had said he would, in a fresh coat, and with the wind at his back. Lady Agatha received him coolly. Her sources in the county were ancient and very accurate, and she had already heard every relevant fact concerning the gentleman's character. But the thing could not be prevented without an incivility she was not yet prepared to commit. Marchmont requested a quarter-hour's walk in the conservatory with Lady Honora. Lady Agatha granted it and stationed a footman at the door. The conservatory at Windermere was long and warm and full of citrus trees in Italian pots that had wintered indoors for the better part of a century. The air was damp and sweet. Honora walked at Marchmont's side without taking his arm. "I shall be brief," he said. "I have spent the night weighing whether I ought to speak. I am resolved that I must." "Then speak." "4 summers ago," he said, "you were at the Litchets for the month of August." Her breath stopped. She did not permit her step to alter. "I was in Somerset at the same time," he went on, "at a small house of my uncle's, within 5 miles of the Litchet place. I called at the Litchets on an afternoon in that month, and was told that the cousin they had been entertaining had departed suddenly 2 days before. I thought no more of it until this past summer, when, at a card party in Bath, an elderly lady of the Litchet acquaintance remarked in my hearing that the niece they had kept that August had been sent away at first light because she had been discovered, at night, in the kitchen garden, in conversation with a gentleman who was not a relation. Honora did not stop walking. She said nothing. I have not thought of the matter from that day to this. I think of it now only because I find you contracted to a man I have reason to believe was the gentleman in the garden, and I find you about to marry him under terms arranged without your knowledge of his identity, and I cannot in conscience stand by. How did you discover his identity? The old lady at Bath named him. She had it from a kitchen maid later dismissed from the Litchets, who came to service in her household, where she is to this day. The kitchen maid remembers everything, she was instructed to remember. And you have come here, Honora said slowly. To offer what? I have come to offer you a quieter life, he said. I have the means to carry you from this house before the 15th of December. I have the means to ensure that the story at the Litchits never reaches a drawing room in London. I ask only that you do me the honor of becoming my wife instead of his. I do not require you to love me. I require only that you not be sold into the house of a man whose touch has, I understand, already compromised you. Honora stopped walking. She looked at him for a long while. And if I refuse, she said. He did not answer at once. Then the story, regrettably, will come out, he said. It will not come out through me. But the kitchen maid is poor and old and talks when she has drink. I cannot prevent what I cannot prevent. I can only prevent, Lady Honora, what I can prevent. I am offering you the prevention. The citrus leaves above them were very green. You may take the day, Marchmont said gently. I return to Ludlow tomorrow. I shall write to your cousin at Greyhurst within the week. You have only to say the word. She did not say the word. She curtsied. She left him in the conservatory with the citrus trees. She walked through the house with her eyes on nothing. She passed the footman at the door. She went up the stairs and into the library, which she now knew to be the Duke's own room after dinner, and she found him there. He rose when he saw her face. What did he say to you? He has offered, she said, to rescue me from you. The Duke went white to the mouth. What did he threaten? She did not answer. Honora, what did he threaten? She sat down in the wing chair by the dead grate. She folded her hands. She found that they weren't shaking. He threatened, she said, to ruin me with a story of a kitchen garden in Somerset. He believes he knows who the gentleman was. He does not know that it was you. The Duke sat down opposite her in the chair he had not previously permitted himself to take. He did not speak for a long moment. I am terrified, he said at last, very quietly, as a man makes a statement he has been avoiding for the whole of a day. Of him. Of you. She raised her eyes. You have it in your power to destroy my house more completely than my father's death has done. And I find I do not, any longer, know how to ask you not to. And she did not know how to answer. For a long time after he had spoken, neither of them moved. The fire had burned down to a single red log that spat quietly at intervals. Somewhere beyond the library door, a clock struck the quarter hour. Honora heard the strike go through her, as if the bronze were striking against her breastbone rather than the air. She said at last, in a voice so level that she surprised herself with it. You would have me decide this, then. I beg your pardon. You would have me decide what is done. Marchmont's threat. My own reputation. Your house. You sit opposite me and tell me you are terrified. And what you mean, I think, is that you want me to choose. Because if I choose, you are spared the burden of choosing. That is not what I meant. Is it not? He did not answer at once. When he did, the answer came slowly, as a man speaks who has been weighing the truth of his words for longer than the words themselves. I have been a coward for 4 years, he said. I was a coward on the terrace the evening you did not come, because I sat upon it for 3 hours and did not knock upon a single door of the house to ask after you. I was a coward when I rode to the Litchits in October and took the word of a housekeeper who was very obviously lying. I was a coward when I decided you had been a dream. I was a coward when I signed the contract my father put before me, in his bed, with the pen that had been his father's, because to sign the contract relieved me of the obligation ever to look a woman in the face again, and wonder if she was you. I have been a coward, Honora, in every material decision I have taken since August of the year the old king died, and I will not deny it to you now. I came into this room an hour ago perfectly prepared to continue." He rose from the chair. He did not cross to her. He stood beside the cold grate, as a man stands who is considering, for the first time, whether he might do a thing differently than he has always done it. "What stopped you?" she said. "You." She did not speak. "You came up the stairs," he said. "You came into this room with Marchmont's threat in your mouth, and you sat down in that chair, and you folded your hands, and you did not shake. And I understood, looking at you, that there was no further corner I could retreat to, and I found that I did not, any longer, wish to retreat." The log in the grate collapsed into its own ash. She rose. She did not know, when she rose, whether she would walk to the door or to him. She stood for a moment halfway between the chair and the hearth, and felt her own decision make itself without her permission. She walked to him. He watched her come. He did not move. When she was within a pace of him, she stopped. She looked up at him. His eyes in the firelight were darker than she remembered them from the morning of the receiving hall, and more afraid, and more open. "I do not know," she said, "how to do this without ruining both of us." "I do not either." "Then tell me what you want, not what ought to be done. What do you want?" He closed his eyes for the length of one breath. "I want," he said, "to not have lost you." Her hand came up. She did not know afterwards whether she had meant to touch his face, or only to steady herself against the wall behind him. Her fingers came to rest along the line of his jaw, at the faint old mark where in a riding accident at 15, his cheek had been opened by a branch. He had told her the story of the scar in the kitchen garden at the Litchets. She had forgotten, across the intervening years, that she knew it. She remembered it now. He turned his face into her hand. She kissed him. It wasn't the kiss of the kitchen garden. The kiss of the kitchen garden had been a young kiss, careful, brief, and shocked at its own daring. This kiss was the kiss of two people who had been apart for 4 years, and had each, across those years, lost a great many things which could not be got back, and who understood at the moment of meeting that the kiss itself was a kind of final accounting. His arms came around her. They were careful at first. They were not careful for very long. The fire had died entirely by the time they spoke again. They had not left the library. He had bolted the door, but only after. He had taken his coat from the back of a chair and laid it for them both upon the long window seat, because the chair was too narrow and the floor was too cold. And neither of them, when it came to it, had wished to open the door to the corridor and carry this thing up any stair. The window seat had been enough. The window seat had been more than enough. She had not known, she thought afterwards, that her own body could be so quiet and so loud at the same time. He lay with his cheek against her hair. Her hand rested over his heart, where the bandaged knuckles she had tended in this same room a night before now pressed warm through the linen of her own undone sleeve. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "I know." "Honora." "Yes, I cannot marry you on the 15th of December, as though nothing has occurred in this room tonight. I cannot go through the parish ceremony and the bishop's blessing, and stand at the front of a church and say vows at you, as though I had not made them in this room, an hour ago, without words. I know. And I cannot, Honora, permit Marchmont to walk out of this house tomorrow with any fragment of his threat intact. I had thought, when you came in, that I was going to weather it. I cannot weather it now, not with what has happened. Then do not weather it." She felt him breathe. His hand moved across her back and settled there. "What you propose," he said. "In the morning," she said, "I shall refuse him. Publicly enough that he cannot claim I left him any hope. I shall do it at the breakfast table before my cousin departs, so that Tobias is a witness, and returns to Greyhurst with the refusal already on his lips. I shall do it without mentioning the Litchets at all, because to deny the story gives it weight. I shall do it as a woman who has already chosen. And Marchmont will ride to Ludlow as he promised, and will write his letter, and will be answered by my cousin, and by yours, with such cold courtesy as will freeze his fingers upon the pen. And if the kitchen maid talks, then she talks. And we shall both be in London in the spring, and we shall neither of us flinch, and we shall stand at the foot of the ballroom as though the story is so uninteresting that no one of any consequence could possibly repeat it. That is the only way. Yes, he said. Yes, she said. A silence. You have thought this through, he said, in a tone that was not quite amusement. I've had 3 weeks, she said, to think a great many things through. He kissed the crown of her head. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. She lay and listened to the faint breath of him against her hair, and to the deeper breath of the house below them, and she understood that she had crossed a line tonight, which had nothing to do with the line that had been crossed in the physical sense, and that the line she had crossed was this. She had permitted herself to hope for him. The cost of hope, she had learned 4 summers since, could be very high. She was about, she thought, to learn it a second time. She was, at the same instant, nearly certain she was not going to mind. But certainty, in such matters, was a thing she had made the mistake of trusting once before. She was determined not to make it again. And in a small room on the other side of the county, in a coaching inn 5 miles from Ludlow, Mr. Gideon Marchmont had already begun the letter that he did not intend to wait a week to send. The light came pale and silver into the library at a little after 6. They parted before the servants were up. He walked her to her chamber door in his stockinged feet, with his coat about her shoulders, and he did not speak until she had her hand upon the latch. Honora. Yes. I shall be in the breakfast room at 8:30. Whatever you do, I shall stand beside you while you do it. I know. He did not kiss her again. He bowed, very seriously, as a man bows to a woman he has only just met and intends to honor until the end of his days, and he went down the corridor to his own chamber with the careful tread of a man whose life had materially altered in the space of 9 hours. She lay upon her own untouched bed for an hour. She did not sleep. She rose. She dressed without ringing for her maid, because she did not trust her own face in front of a servant at this hour. She pinned her hair herself. She put on a plain morning gown of charcoal gray. She stood for perhaps a minute in front of the glass upon her dressing table, studying the face in it, and decided that the face would serve. She went down. The Duke was already in the breakfast room. So was Lady Agatha. So was Tobias. Marchmont was not. Tobias looked up as she entered. His expression was of the kind that a man wears when he has been composing a difficult sentence for a quarter of an hour and has not yet been delivered of it. My dear, he said, Marchmont has gone. Honora stopped inside the door. Gone. Left the house at first light. Took coffee in the kitchen, the butler says, and paid his shot with the housekeeper, and rode out by the back avenue before any of the family was stirring. He left no message for me. He left this for you. He passed her a folded paper. The seal was Marchmont's. It was not addressed. She did not open it at table. She placed it beside her plate. She sat. Lady Agatha poured her coffee without being asked. The Duke across the table said nothing. His face was perfectly composed. Only his hands, resting one over the other upon the cloth, were not as steady as they might have been. Tobias cleared his throat. I had meant to depart this morning. I find myself uncertain whether to go or remain. Go, said Lady Agatha, before anyone else could speak. Go home to Greyhurst, Mr. Pembroke. Your cousin will follow you there before the end of the week, and I expect you shall all be easier once she is under her own roof again for a short while. The Duke and I have a small matter of correspondence to attend to in the interim, with which you need not be troubled." Tobias looked from Lady Agatha to Honora, to the Duke, and back to Lady Agatha, and comprehended that a decision had been taken above his head, and that it had been taken kindly, and he nodded. He excused himself after a quarter of an hour. He went. When the wheels of his carriage had faded from the gravel, Honora opened the letter. She read it without any visible movement. She folded it. She passed it to the Duke. He read it. His jaw went tight. "He has written to 3 persons," she said quietly to Lady Agatha, whom she had decided, in the night, to trust entirely. A lady of his acquaintance in Bath, a cousin of his in London, and his own aunt, a dowager widow who lives, I believe, in South Audley Street, and who keeps a salon. He has written the same letter to all 3, framed as a discreet inquiry after the character of a young gentlewoman who is shortly to marry into a distinguished house. The letter asks whether anything was known, at the time of the Litchett summer, of an incident concerning a kitchen garden. Lady Agatha set down her cup. "I see," she said. "The letters will have left Ludlow by the afternoon post," the Duke said. "We have, at best, 3 days before the first answer is sought, and a week before the first answer is gossiped." Lady Agatha, unmoved, poured herself a fresh cup of coffee. Then she said, "We shall want a week." Honora looked across the table at the Duke. She had not properly looked at him since the gray dawn in the corridor. She looked at him now. She saw a man who had been her lover 10 hours before, who was her husband upon paper already, and who had understood, before she had spoken a word, what she was about to say to him. "I cannot," she said, "be in this house when the story begins to move." He raised his eyes to hers. "Honora." "No," she said gently. "Listen to me. I shall go to Greyhurst this afternoon. I shall travel in my own carriage with Tobias, whom we shall catch upon the road. I shall be seen to leave this house in daylight, with a maid and a coachman and a footman and the proper quantity of baggage, exactly as a young bride goes home for a last interval with her family before her wedding. The story, if it comes, shall find me in mourning for my father in my cousin's parlor, which is the story 100 young women have lived before me, and which signifies nothing. If it finds me at Windermere, it is no longer a rumor. It is a confirmation." The Duke's hand closed upon the edge of the table. "I shall not let you go," he said. "You shall," she said. "Because you love me, you shall. Because you love your house, you shall. Because your mother was a good woman, and your father, in the end, was not an unkind one. You shall. I am not leaving you. I am going ahead of you." He was a long moment in answering. When he did, his voice had a texture it had not possessed the night before. "And if I do not write," he said, "and if a week goes by, and you think I have retreated, then you must write," she said, "so that I do not think it." Lady Agatha rose. "I shall order the carriage," she said, "and I shall write this morning to an old friend of mine in Portman Square, who owes me 3 favors, and remembers exactly how she came to owe them. Eat your breakfast, children. You neither of you slept." She left the room. The Duke did not look at his plate. He did not look at Honora either. "You are doing to me," he said at last, very quietly, "what I did to you." "No," she said. "I am doing what you could not do for me 4 years ago, and what I shall do now because I can. I am leaving in daylight. I am leaving in a carriage of my own. I am leaving you a direction to which you may write, and I am asking you to write. I shall write, every day." "Every day," he said. She rose. She did not cross to him. She stopped in the doorway, as she had stopped in the doorway of the library in the gray dawn, and she did not turn. Crispin. Yes. Do not fail me a second time. I shall not. She left the room. She went upstairs. She rang for her maid. She began with her own hands to pack. Greyhurst Manor was smaller than Windermere, older, and a good deal less well-heated. The front hall smelled of wet dogs and cold stone, and the peat smoke of a fire that had been burning longer than any of the inhabitants. Honora had made Greyhurst her home after her mother's death, in the care of the uncle who had then held it, and she had never, until this week, thought of it as a place to which one returned for shelter. She thought of it so now. Tobias brought her down from the carriage, with a ceremony he had not shown her a week ago. He had, somewhere between Windermere and the first change of horses, made up his mind to behave as though nothing had occurred, and the discipline of his silence was, she found, a small and unexpected mercy. He had not asked her a single question for the length of the 2-day journey. He had read his county paper. He had offered her the rug from his own knees when the wind turned at sunset. He had kept his counsel. He was, she understood for perhaps the first time in her adult life, a good man who had simply not been given the occasions on which to demonstrate it. She went to her old room. It had been kept as she had left it. A fresh fire had been lit. A jug of warm water stood on the washstand. Her old books were on the shelf, in the order in which she had shelved them at 17. Her mother's miniature was still upon the mantel in its tortoise-shell frame. She sat down upon the edge of the bed for a long while, and she did not weep, and she did not sleep, and she did not do any of the things a young woman might reasonably be expected to do after a fortnight of the kind she had just had. She wrote a letter to the Duke instead. It was 3 lines long. It said only that she had arrived, that Tobias had been kind, and that the road between Windermere and Greyhurst was perfectly passable in the event that anyone should have occasion to ride it. She signed it with her Christian name and nothing else. She sent it by a groom of her cousins whom she trusted. She did not receive an answer by the following post. She did not receive an answer by the post after that. On the 3rd day she began, against her better judgment, to count the posts. She had her maid bring them up to her sitting room, rather than to the hall salver, because the performance of looking through the salver in Tobias's presence had become unendurable. She opened each post alone. She read with her heart behind her teeth. There was a bill from a Bond Street milliner she had never visited. There was a condolence card from a distant acquaintance who had only just learned of her father's passing 3 seasons after the fact. There was a letter from her old governess in Kent, who wished to be remembered to her in terms of considerable warmth and several misremembered dates. There was no letter from Windermere. On the 5th day, Lady Agatha's letter arrived. It was brief and steady. The Duke had written twice to her, Lady Agatha said, in terms of great restraint, and had 3 times inquired whether she thought it prudent for him to come. Lady Agatha had replied each time that she did not. The situation was in her view delicate. The letters from Ludlow had been traced. One had gone astray. The other 2 had been answered, at Lady Agatha's particular request, by persons in her own acquaintance, with icy politeness. The rumor had not yet reached Portman Square. It had, however, begun to cross the counties. Lady Agatha recommended patience. Lady Agatha sent her love. There was no letter from the Duke. The silence became a thing she carried from room to room. She took it with her when she walked in the orchard in the afternoon. She took it up the stairs at night. She laid it beside her upon the pillow. She did not, she found, resent it. She had asked him to write. She had also asked him, in the first and more material request of the breakfast table, to act. She understood that the 2 requests were not, at this moment, compatible. On the 6th day, Honora went to the attic room above the stable court, which had been her hiding place as a girl, and which she had not entered in 11 years. The key was where she had left it. The room smelled of dust and old apples and summer hay. She closed the door behind her. She sat down upon the floor in her good traveling dress. She put her face into her hands. And she wept, at last, with her whole body, for perhaps a quarter of an hour, without restraint and without shame, for a great many things at once, and for one thing in particular, which she could no longer pretend was not the thing. She loved him. She had not permitted herself, until this moment, to use the word. She used it now. She held it in her mouth. It tasted of iron and of lavender and of the smell of a library fire after the log has gone. It was a word she had sworn in her cousin's parlor 3 weeks ago that she would not say, and she was saying it now, and the saying of it did not lessen her. It did not make her a smaller or a weaker woman. It made her a woman who had, at 28, at last said a true thing to herself, in an attic, alone, sitting upon the floor of a room she had last wept in at 16. It did not, however, tell her what he was doing, or why he had not written, or whether the silence from Windermere was a silence of strategy or of retreat. She did not know if he was fighting for her. She did not know if he had decided, in the absence of her face at his breakfast table, that the cost was too great after all, and that he had better return to the path his father had laid down for him, as he had done once before, when the cost had become too great. She had given him, by leaving Windermere, precisely the door through which he could walk if he wished to walk through it. She had believed at the breakfast table that she was leaving in trust. She understood now, on the attic floor, that she had also been leaving in a certain dread of the answer. The dread had been her own, and not his doing, and she did not blame him for it. She blamed, rather, the 24-year-old girl in her who had never quite stopped waiting, across the 4 intervening years, for a letter which had not come. She dried her face. She rose. She smoothed her skirt. She went back down the stable stair. In the hall she met Tobias, who was holding a folded newspaper in his hand, and whose face wore an expression she had not seen on it before. "Rosie," he said, and then corrected himself, for he had not called her that since she was 12. "Honora, you had better sit down and read this." It was not a letter. It was a London paper 3 days old, from a press Tobias did not subscribe to, which had been sent up from the village by a neighbor with a scribbled note that said, "Only." Page 4. Society column. Read this before anyone else reads it to you. Page 4 carried the usual business: a reported engagement in Cavendish Square, a duchess's ball at which the supper had been pronounced inadequate, the removal of a member of Parliament from one club to another, and, set in small type beneath a decorative rule, an item headed simply "Notable." Honora read it once. She read it twice. She read it a third time, and then she folded the paper in half and in half again, and she placed it in her lap, and she looked at her cousin. Tobias was watching her. He said nothing. He had learned, across 11 days, when to say nothing. The item reported, in the measured tone which the column employed when it did not wish to appear to be reporting at all, that His Grace the Duke of Windermere had been present at an assembly in Bath on the evening of the 14th of October, and had there, in the hearing of a company numbering some 50 persons, including 3 persons of the first consequence, made a public statement of certain unusual candor. His Grace, it appeared, had taken the occasion of a reference in conversation to a rumor then circulating in that city concerning a young gentlewoman, to interrupt with the observation that he himself had been the gentleman in the matter, that he had, at the time, been gravely ill with a brain fever contracted upon the road, that he had entered the kitchen garden of the house in question in a state of partial delirium, that a young cousin of the family had found him there and had shown him the kindness to fetch him water and to sit with him until he was able to return to his chamber, and that the entire circumstance reflected upon her nothing except a gentlewoman's decency in an hour of illness. His Grace had then named the young lady. His Grace had added, it was understood, that any person in the present company, or any person in the city of Bath, or in any other city in the kingdom, who found cause to make further reference to the matter, should be so good as to address himself directly to the Duke of Windermere at Windermere Hall, where His Grace would receive them at any hour. The column observed, with restraint, that the Duke's bandaged right hand had added a certain weight to the peroration. Honora did not cry. She had already cried. He had taken the scandal upon himself. He had named her. He had named himself. He had made the whole of it his own. He had turned the weapon in Marchmont's hand into a stick with which Marchmont could now only beat his own face. He had done it 4 days ago. He had not written to her because he had been riding, at first light, to Bath and across the counties to 3 drawing-rooms in London, and back again to Windermere, and he had not written to her afterwards because he had understood, as she had understood at the breakfast table, that the silence between them was itself the protection of the thing they had become. Any letter from him to her, in the hand of the Duke of Windermere, upon paper bearing the Ashcombe seal, would have been opened somewhere along the post road by someone in Marchmont's pay, and would have been read with great attention, and would have been returned to the post with the seal apparently intact. He had chosen silence because silence was the only thing Marchmont could not read. He had not failed her a second time. He had, on the contrary, done precisely the thing that 4 summers ago he had failed to do. He had come out of the house in daylight, into the company of persons of consequence, and he had spoken her name. Tobias, looking at her face, said quietly, "There is more. He came to Greyhurst this morning, while you were out." She looked up. "Marchmont," Tobias said. "Not the Duke. Marchmont came at 10. I had him put in the drawing-room. I did not know what else to do. He said he had come upon a friendly call of condolence regarding an embarrassment which I must now have heard of. He used that word. Embarrassment. He has the impudence of the devil himself, Rosie. I went to the library to find the paper. I was coming to find you when the butler told me the Duke of Windermere was at the door, unannounced, without his valet, his horse in a lather. I left them in separate rooms. I have told neither of them that the other is in the house. I have told them only that you are at home, and will receive them in the order that pleases you. The Duke said he would wait upon your convenience. Marchmont said he had only a quarter-hour to spare. I hope you will forgive me for remarking that the only man in this house with a quarter-hour to spare at this moment is Mr. Marchmont, and that he shall spare it whether he wishes to or not." Honora put the folded paper down upon the hall table. She straightened it with a care which was not required of a piece of newsprint. She drew, once, a long and careful breath. "Tell them," she said, "that I shall receive them both. Together. In the drawing-room. In 10 minutes. Rosie, are you certain? The Duke would wish, I imagine, to speak with you alone before this. He has ridden from the coast. He has not eaten. He has not slept. You may keep Marchmont waiting the half-hour, and no one shall think the worse of it. I do not intend to keep Marchmont waiting. I intend to be finished with Marchmont inside a quarter of an hour, and to have an hour afterwards for the Duke, which he shall need rather more than the half-hour your kindness would spare him. Tell them, Tobias. Together. In 10 minutes. She went upstairs. She rang for her maid. She had her hair dressed fresh, and her gown changed for a darker one, and the small pearl pin that had been her mother's set at her throat. She studied her own face in the glass with the attention a general gives to a map before a campaign. She found it equal to the morning. She came down at the hour she had named, neither early nor late, with her hands steady and her pulse surprisingly quiet, and she walked across the black and white flags of the front hall toward the drawing-room door, and she did not pause before she opened it. "I am not," she had told Tobias, afraid any longer. It was the first thing she had said in a fortnight that she had entirely believed. She came down the stairs at the hour she had named, with her hair dressed, and her mother's small pearl pin at her throat, and a composure she had not possessed at any point in the last 11 days. The two men stood at opposite ends of the drawing room, with the length of the Turkish carpet between them. Marchmont was at the window, hands behind his back, the light upon him. The Duke was at the mantel, his right hand still in its linen. He did not come forward when she entered. He was permitting her the room. She went to the center of the carpet. She did not sit. "Mr. Marchmont," she said, "I have received your letter. I have also seen the London papers. I believe you have as well." "Lady Honora," Marchmont began, "I have not finished. You wrote to me and to 3 other persons a letter, which was designed to compel me, by fear, to accept an offer I had already silently declined. You were good enough to send it from Ludlow before I had given you any answer, which saves me the trouble of wondering whether you would have sent it in any circumstance. You have been answered, as I understand it, by persons better placed than yourself, with a plainness that I gather has been instructive. You have now come to my cousin's house under pretense of a friendly call. I shall not have it. I shall not receive any visit from you in this or any other house. I shall not be written to. I shall not be thought of. You will leave Greyhurst within the hour. You will not trouble my family or the Duke's, and you will take whatever lesson there is to be taken from what has been done to your letter and to your name. Is that understood?" Marchmont's color had risen to a very high pitch. "Lady Honora, this is excessively harsh. I acted from concern." "You acted," she said, "from greed and from spite, and you acted in the belief that you could frighten me, and you were mistaken in your estimate of me as surely as the Duke of Windermere was mistaken in his estimate of himself. I wish you a safe journey to Ludlow. I shall not see you out." She did not look away from him. He looked, for a space of 3 long seconds, as though he might attempt one further sentence. He did not. He bowed. He left the room. She heard the front door close. She did not turn until the sound of his horse was upon the gravel, and then upon the lane, and then nothing at all. When she turned, the Duke had crossed the carpet without her hearing him, and was standing an arm's length from her. "You should not have done that," he said softly. "I should have done that. You had already done your share." He laughed once, very quietly, and ran his bandaged hand across his face. He looked, she thought, as though he had not slept for 3 nights together. "I did not know," he said, "whether you would want me to come. I did not know whether I had done enough at Bath, or too much, or whether the thing would reach you before I did. I rode from the coast yesterday. I have been 14 hours in the saddle. I cannot feel my knee. Come and sit." He did not sit. He took her hands in his. "I have been composing a speech," he said, "since the night before last, when I left the last of the drawing rooms in South Audley Street. I had intended to deliver it to you here in some decent order. I find I cannot remember any of it. Then tell me one thing, anything." "When," she said, "when did it begin for you?" "Not the kitchen garden." "Before." He drew a breath. He looked past her for a moment, at the far wall, at the Turkish carpet, at something older than either of them, and the look that came onto his face was one she had never been permitted to see on it before. "Before the kitchen garden," he said. "Before the fever. Before I knew your name." It was a Tuesday afternoon at the Litchits, and I had come down to the library after riding, and I looked out of the west window, because a dog was barking. You were on the lawn below me with that dog, which I believe belonged to one of the Litchit girls, and you had been chasing it, and it had turned, and chased you, and you had fallen laughing into the grass. You were laughing so that I could hear it through the pain. I had not, at that time, heard a woman laugh in that particular way since my mother was alive. I stood at the window for perhaps 2 minutes. I did not go down. I did not introduce myself. When I met you in the kitchen garden 3 nights later, I knew you at once and did not say so. I have regretted not going down to the lawn every day of the 4 years since. I regret it still, and I shall not, from this day forward, fail to go down a stair because I am afraid of what I shall find at the bottom of it. She closed her eyes. I have no memory of that Tuesday, she said after a moment. You have carried a picture of me in your mind for 4 years that I cannot produce on demand. You have already matched it, he said. Say it, Crispin. I love you, Honora. I have loved you for 4 years and 1 week. I shall love you beyond any usefulness of the fact. I do not know how to ask you to be my wife, because you already are, on paper, and I have not earned the honor of the second asking. But I am asking. She opened her eyes. Ask me again in the drawing room at Windmere on the 15th of December, she said, in front of the bishop and your aunt and my cousin and every servant who can be prevailed upon to attend. Ask me again in such a way that no person living is in any doubt that I am your choice. That is all. That is all I have ever required of you. I shall, he said. Then come. We must speak to Tobias. She did not let go of his hand as she led him out of the drawing room, and he did not let go of hers. They walked through the corridor together at the pace of 2 people who had discovered that there was no longer any hurry about anything, and that from this afternoon forward they would be walking in this fashion, through this or some other corridor, for the rest of a great many years. They went to Tobias together. Tobias, finding the 2 of them standing hand in hand in his own library, put down the decanter from which he had been about to fortify himself, looked at his cousin's face, and delivered himself of a single sentence. I gather, he said, that I am to be asked once more for what has already been signed. Very well. You have it. And he poured them each a glass. The wedding was held at Windmere on the 15th of December, in a bitter, clear sun with snow upon the yews. The scandal at Bath had not spread as much as been paid down. Marchmont, finding no further use for his grievance, and no company willing to entertain it, had taken his defeat and his unmarried self to the Continent, where he was understood to be residing in Vienna. The Duke's cousin at Windmere, who had also been his steward, Hollis, had in the interval arranged for the kitchen maid at Bath to be pensioned out of a small estate of her own in Somerset, where she had since declined, with some dignity, to know anyone at all of the name Marchmont. Lady Agatha's friend in Portman Square had done the rest. By the morning of the wedding, the matter was, in the careful phrase of the column which had begun it, no longer considered remarkable. The Duke's father was not present, being dead. The Duke's mother was not present, being dead these many years. Honora's father was not present, being dead. Honora's mother was not present, being dead. There were not many people. There did not need to be. Tobias gave her away. Lady Agatha sat in the front pew and wept into a handkerchief she had been saving since her own wedding day. The bishop, who was a distant relation, was brief and warm. The Duke made his responses clearly. Honora made hers. The Duke's bandage had been removed the week before. When the ceremony was done, the Duke took his wife's hand and led her not to the carriage, but to the long gallery, and through the long gallery to the library, and he closed the door behind them. He asked her then, as she had requested, a second time. She answered him, as she had intended, a second time. And they went out to their household. 2 years later, on an afternoon in early December, with snow again upon the yews, Honora sat upon the window seat of the library, with a child of 4 months in her arms. The child was a daughter. The child had been named Agatha, after her great-aunt, who had wept at the christening as she had wept at the wedding, and had then set about the business of spoiling the infant with the thoroughness of a woman who had waited 74 years for the opportunity. The infant, for her part, had taken to being spoiled with an ease that suggested she had inherited, from one or the other of her parents, a certain capacity for being loved in plain daylight without flinching from it. The Duke came into the library at 3:30 in his riding dress, cold from the frost, and sat down on the window seat beside his wife and his daughter, and said nothing at all for a long while. The child was sleeping. "You have been out a long time," Honora said. "I have been to the lower pasture. The Craswell boy is nearly 12. He has asked, in the manner of a boy of 12, whether he might be permitted to school himself at my expense. And what did you answer?" I answered that he might. She smiled. He put his arm about her and about the child, and leaned his head briefly against her temple. "Honora." "Yes." "I have been thinking," he said, "that I was mistaken at the receiving hall the morning you arrived. I thought then that you had come for me. I understand now, having had 2 years to consider it, that you came for yourself. You came because you had been owed 4 years of an answer, and you meant to have the answer, whether I deserved the giving of it or not. You came because you were braver than I had been, and you had decided to be brave in this, as in all things. You did not come for me. I was only the question to which you had come to put an answer. I had it wrong that morning. I did come for you," she said. "Did you?" She considered. "I came," she said, for an answer. The answer happened to be you." He laughed, and she laughed, and the child stirred and did not wake. And the Duke of Windermere, whose house had been saved by a woman who had walked into his receiving hall one October morning with her chin up and her eyes steady, and who had asked of him only that he not fail her twice, held his wife and his daughter upon the window seat in the library, where his life had in the truest sense begun, and was silent for a time. Outside the window, the ewes stood quietly in their snow. If you have stayed with Honora and Crispin to the end of their story, thank you. Theirs began with a contract signed unseen, and it might have ended there, as so many such contracts do. It did not, because 2 people in a library had the courage, at the very last, to speak plainly to one another. It is not, as it turns out, the storms that decide us. It is the hour, after the storm, in which we decide whether to name what we feel, and to whom. If this story has moved you, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell for the next. There are more such hours waiting, and more such libraries, and more such window seats, and I should be glad of your company in them.